All right, welcome viewers and listeners alike. I am Nico Perrino, and I am the Director of Communications here at the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education and the host of So to Speak, the Free Speech Podcast. And I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming the dance rock groups the Slants to FIRE's Philadelphia headquarters today because they are heroes in the First Amendment community, because they have a case in front of the Supreme Court right now that seeks to expand First Amendment protections. The case is Lee v. Tam, and they're challenging the Patent and Trademark Office's contention that their band name, the Slants, is disparaging and therefore ineligible for trademark registration. The question before the court is whether the disparagement clause of the 1946 Lanham Trademark Act is invalid under the First Amendment. The Slants, welcome to Philadelphia.
Thanks so much for having us.
Why the Slants? Why the band name?
Back in the day when I was looking to start a band that I knew that I wanted to portray the Asian American experience, I also wanted to challenge some stereotypes. So I started asking people around me, like, what's something you think all Asians have in common? They immediately responded with slanted eyes, which I always thought was interesting because, number one, it's not true. Not all Asians have slanted eyes, and Asians are not the only people with any kind of slant to their eyes. But number two, it's also a way to pay homage to Asian American activists who've been using the term in this kind of reappropriated way for decades. So then we could kind of talk about our own slant on life of what it's like to be people of color.
Creative, yeah.
Yeah, it's also a musical phrase, slant guitar cabs and that kind of thing. And I thought this is a really interesting word with a lot of nuances that we can use to kind of drive conversations about our experiences, and more importantly, as a band, have a cool sounding name.
Yeah, so when the band started, was it just you?
It was just me for the first 2 years.
Okay.
And it was just kind of scrounging around, posting ads up in Asian supermarkets, Craigslist, MySpace back then, trying to find a lineup to put together so that we can start playing and recording music.
Yeah, and what did you guys think about the name, the Slants?
I like, again, what Simon's saying. It presses forward that discussion that I think not only of our community, but our whole world needs to have.
Yeah, because you're a new addition to the
Yeah,
band,
I'm
right?
the newest one. I've been here about, 6 or 7 months, just about.
Great. And so you're a band and you wanted to get this band name trademarked? Yeah. What was that process like?
Well, originally it's supposed to be easy. It's supposed to only take a couple months and be a few $100, but it turned out to be a battle that's lasted over 8 years now. We've gone to the Trademark Office multiple times, Federal Circuit, which is second highest court in the land, and of course, the Supreme Court as well. All the while, I would say it's probably one of the most frustrating things that I've ever done, because we're trying to do something empowering for our community. We're actually widely supported by our community. I mean, surveys show 92 to 98% of Asian Americans believe in our use of the name. And then we have a single government employee who disagrees, who is not Asian American, who's never talked to an Asian about our name, who thinks, oh, because it used to be some obscure racial slur, that we don't have the right to use it. And so they've been denying us over and over again for almost a decade now.
Yeah, and they're denying you under the disparagement clause of the 1946 Lanham Trademark Act, which I mentioned before, which prohibits trademarks that may disparage persons, living or dead, institutions, beliefs, or national symbols, or bring them into contempt or disrepute. But they've trademarked, or they've registered trademarks for other names that you'd think would fall under the ambit of this clause. The Reason magazine submitted an amicus brief, and they talked about how the registered trademarks include such hallowed brands as Capitalism Sucks Donkey Balls and Take Your Panties Off. And I guess NWA also has a trademark.
They do, yeah. And so obviously they're not consistent about it. And that's one of the issues of the Lanham Act, is that it's incredibly vague. And we believe that vagueness actually is one of the reasons why it's unconstitutional. Because who can define what disparaging means? And who ultimately gets to say what's disparaging or scandalous or not? When you have unclear rules, it makes it unfair for everyday citizens who want rights, who apply for them, and can't be guaranteed of the result either way. Really, it depends if the examining attorney's having a good day or a bad day, and if you get the right person.
Yeah, because they have also approved names that include slant in it.
Yes,
as well.
Hundreds of times. I'm the only person in all of U.S. history to to be denied a trademark registration for Slant on the premise that it's racist towards Asian people.
Why'd you decide to sue?
Well, ultimately, I decided to appeal after I learned how the law was being used. It was being used disproportionately to target members of the LGBTQ community and communities of color, because those tend to be the groups that reappropriate language and stuff that's offensive and say, you know what, I'm not going to let this affect my community, I'm going to turn it into self-empowerment instead. But reappropriation is really confusing to the government. It's really confusing to people who say, like, wait, can I use this word or can I not use this word? Is this offensive or not? And therefore, the government says, you know what, you guys don't get to do it.
Yeah, had you all been interested in First Amendment issues, free speech issues previous to this?
I'm just happy to be a musician. Like, I saw that ad and just joined the band. Then, you know, got into the snowball effect of, because I joined the band before it even went to the federal circuit and everything. So I was just like, oh, this band has a little bit of press, and now it has a lot of press.
Well, that's interesting, because I want to explore that avenue of questioning, dealing with the importance of free speech to artists and musicians. I mean, why is it important that you have these protections as musicians?
I mean, I think it's absolute, because artists should have room to protect their creative property, their intellectual property rights. And I think that whether it's a musician or a comedian or a filmmaker, you need to absolutely have these protections so that you can inspire more art, more creative works. If the government has an issue with parody or satire or even things that they disagree with, then I think it's a problem. We shouldn't allow the government to choose winners and losers when it comes to viewpoints or beliefs, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's bad for democracy. Yeah. You need to have tools like satire and wit to be able to neuter malice, because I firmly believe that, you know, the cure for bad speech, hate speech, is not censorship. It's better speech, it's more nuanced speech. Otherwise, you're just shutting the conversation down and allowing those kind of problems to linger.
What do you think of the environment for free speech in this country right now, especially after the election? Tensions are high. It seems like we can't talk across lines of differences. Do you think free speech is an important tool to sort of reconcile those differences?
Absolutely. I think there's a kind of this mythical idea. People say, oh, our country's too PC now, or something like that, as if, you know, it's too politically correct, as if you're going to get a ticket, and like some policeman's going to come say, well, you know what, you're not being PC enough. And that's not true. Most of the time, if you actually have genuine interactions with people, people start seeing that, hey, we actually don't have different values. We have the same values. We just interpret them a little bit differently. And so I think you need to allow room for that conversation to take place.
Yeah. So for practical purposes, though, it's also important that you can register the trademark, the Slants, because record labels often require this of bands.
Yes, in order to be signed.
Yeah, and I read somewhere, I think it was in the Washington Post, that there's actually 2 bands after you formed that called themselves the Slants?
They did pop up, but they're gone now.
They're gone now. But had you registered the trademark, they could have seen it on the Federal Registry of Trademarks, right? So that's the distinction here, is that you can still enforce your mark. You still have the trademark, the Slants, but it's not listed on the federal website, right?
Well, that's actually kind of up for debate.
Really?
So there's a couple of legal experts who believe that if you have a mark that's not registerable, it's not enforceable under common law protection, based on a couple of cases that date like over 100 years back. No one's really tested that theory out yet. We might be the first, so we're not exactly sure. But that being said, people who say things like, oh, you can still use the trademark, you just can't have the registration, kind of sounds like you can still ride the bus, you just got to sit in the back. I mean, we shouldn't have secondary rights. We shouldn't be treated like second-class citizens just because we have a mark that the government may not like.
Yeah. So how does everyone in the band feel about the Supreme Court case at this point? Has it risen the band's profile at all? Has it had that sort of Streisand effect when the government seeks to censor or diminish a name? It actually amplifies it?
Well, Joe's been actually working on it from a different perspective. He's actually working on a documentary.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
I mean, just following Simon, so I joined right before the federal circuit, and I actually went with Simon to the federal circuit to sort of experience it for the first round. I would say, to me, as a musician, it's a big distraction. As a filmmaker who is interested in the story, it's definitely, it's a name recognition. People who I meet on the street, if I said the Slants, they would be like, oh, I've heard of you guys, but not the music. It tends to be, oh, I read you on Washington Post, or I heard you on NPR. And that's the extent of their knowledge of the band, and a lot of times that actually hurts us a little bit because then our music's not being put out. They focus on the news.
Yeah, we get pigeonholed as like the band going to court, not the band with like really great 80s synth pop music.
I always joke about cool points, and I feel like we lose a lot of cool points for going to court.
Yeah. Well, Simon, you've always melded music and activism, right, since the get-go.
More or less. I think just the fact that we're establishing an Asian American band is a form of activism in of itself, because we're kind of defying the norm.
Yeah.
Most people can't name any other Asian American bands in the country. And so just by us existing, we're kind of challenging the status quo and saying, you know what, we're going to do something a little bit different here.
Yeah, you said when you started you were the only all-Asian dance rock group in the United States.
Yeah.
Asian American.
Asian American. Yeah, that's I added up the United States.
Yeah, there's bands from Asia, but not any kind of born and raised from the U.S.
Yeah. What do your fans think of this whole battle?
I think most of them think it's ridiculous that we have to go through this, but they're really, really supportive, and to me it's amazing because not only do we have great support from the Asian American community, but people who are outside of that experience as well. We got people both on the far right as well as on the far left in support of our case. So it kind of doesn't fall along traditional partisan lines. It doesn't fall along demographical or generational lines. Like we just have broad support. Most of the time people are like, this is really ridiculous. Why does your band have to go all the way to the Supreme Court to fight this? You ought to just have that trademark registration. That the everyday layperson gets it and knows that, hey, or they'll say like, don't we have the First Amendment? Doesn't that help you out in any kind of way?
Have you made any sort of unlikely allies in this this fight?
Well, yeah, most people point to the football team, Washington.
The Redskins. Yeah, the Redskins. They try to insert themselves into your case, right?
They tried to take over. They filed a motion at the Supreme Court to combine our case with theirs and to have them argue instead of us because they said they were better advocates.
But their case is slightly different because they had the mark. And then it was rescinded.
Yeah, so ours has to do with the registration. Theirs has to do with the cancellation.
So more of a due process issue.
Yeah, and very much a Fifth Amendment issue of like seizure of property because they built over the almost a century a lot of goodwill and invested a lot of money behind their name. So if the government just cancels that right away, that's a different kind of constitutional issue. Yeah. But there are certainly parallels, and we understand that if we win, no doubt it actually helps them, whether we want it to or not.
Were you at the oral arguments?
Yeah, the entire band was.
Yeah, and what was that? Was it sort of surreal?
It was intense. just that hour sitting there in front of the justices, just not knowing what was going to happen and listening to all the questions was really interesting.
Yeah. What did you think? How do you think the argument went? Because the other side argued first, and I was just listening to the argument before this interview, and they asked tough questions of both sides.
Yeah, definitely did. I mean, I think it went pretty well. I think they weren't quite as hard on our attorney, and there were definitely mistakes made on both sides. But I think it shows how complex of issues we're dealing with here, that the court's really trying to wrestle with this line between an inherent civil liberty and offensiveness and good taste. And so it has less to do with the facts. I mean, the facts are what they are. It has to do with the interpretation of those facts. Like, okay, where does the First Amendment end in this case? Where does quote-unquote government speech end? Because in the government's opinion, they think if someone registers a trademark, that constitutes as government speech. Like, this is the government speaking. Although they've registered some very offensive things. They've, so I'm like, if you guys
probably contradictory things. So if it's government speech, the government's arguing out of two sides of its mouth on a lot of issues.
Yeah,
presumably.
Because I was like, okay, so you guys really want to say the government is talking about MILF Hunter? Because that's a registered trademark. You really want to show how inconsistent you are? Because For example, Madonna was rejected for wines, and then it was later on approved by somebody else for wines. The exact same word, exact same mark. Hebe Media, rejected for t-shirts, okay for magazines. Dykes on Bikes, rejected as a name, later on approved, but rejected as a logo.
You'd think almost these trademark attorneys would want this disparagement clause to get stricken down because it just make their lives so much easier.
We're doing them a favor. Because
Go take a longer lunch.
yeah, I mean the reality is they don't have a lot of resources, or they say they don't have a lot of resources, and we're expecting examining attorneys to understand the entire breadth of the English language, every word in the dictionary, in every context, and how it relates to different identities that they may or may not have a connection with. It's an impossible standard, and when you add in these words like, you can't register the stuff that's immoral or scandalous. What's scandalous to me is probably going to be a lot different than what's scandalous to you or Ken or Joe or Yuya or anyone else here, because we all have different life experiences.
And you were talking about the expectation that they'll know what every word means. When they denied your registration, they cited Urban Dictionary.
UrbanDictionary.com, yeah, a wiki site. And the funny thing
It's
is,
now official federal reference site.
the thing is, they actually quote Urban Dictionary all the time, like in many, many other cases. And the ironic thing is that even the print version of Urban Dictionary doesn't use slant as a racial slur. So they realized.
I didn't even know there was a print
Yeah,
version.
there is. The editors took the best and most reliable things and made a print dictionary. And they're like, no, slant is actually not a commonly used racial slur. We're not going to include it.
How has this case affected your personal lives? Because going to court can be, time-consuming and expensive if you don't have a pro bono attorney.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we've had someone working pro bono for the last 6 years. I mean, for me, we're still responsible for appellate printing, which, if you're going through the legal system and you're fighting, you can't go to Kinko's or you use your buddy's printing shop. You have to go through a court-approved printer who charges premium prices for everything. So tens of thousands of dollars have been spent on this case just on printing. Every time you want to appeal, every time you want to file, that's more money. So I've had to take on second and third jobs to pay for this fight. I tell people I've been in the court system for 8 years now, and I haven't even committed a crime. And that's the reality, is even if we win, at the end of the day, I don't get a single cent back from any of those fees. I don't get any of those years back from my life. So it's certainly been a challenge more times than not. But at the end of the day, we have to do what's right, and that's fighting for marginalized communities by protecting the First Amendment. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that civil liberties attorney to go out there and file the lawsuit against the court-mandated printers.
ACLU, come on.
Yeah, right?
Hook us up. But they've been really great. ACLU has been supportive since we went to the federal circuit. And in fact, they actually argued before the court on our behalf as well.
Oh, awesome.
So that was amazing to watch. It was just such a pleasure because Lee, their attorney, is like just on fire. She was just shutting those
Lee Rowland?
Those judges were like trying coming at her, and she was just like, nope, let me tell you how the law works. It was amazing.
So you're trying to go to as many of the arguments as you can.
At least, the federal circuit, when they heard it en banc, so all 12 judges, and then of course at the Supreme Court itself. I mean, as someone working in law, I think it's really important for judges and justices to look at the people who they're making decisions about, because they tend to treat it in a very detached, theoretical kind of sense. And I think it's good to remind them, like, hey, actual human lives are being affected by the decisions you make, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, and you're saying right now that an all-Asian dance rock group can't call themselves the Slants.
That's what they're saying, and so we're trying to fight against that.
Did the patent and trademark office know you were an Asian rock group?
They did. In fact, so when we asked them, we said, hey, Slant's been registered many, many times before. Why did you say it's disparaging or offensive in this case, but not any of those other cases? They said it is incontestable that the applicant is of Asian descent and part of an Asian band. In other words, they said it was precisely because we were Asian. And they tried to prove this by saying, look, if you go to slants.com, there's photos of Asians all over the website. You got dragons and rising suns on your album covers. That's just too Asian. And because in their mind, if people go to the website or they see us in concert and they see a bunch of Asian people on the stage, they're going to automatically think of the racial slur instead of any other definition in the dictionary. But what it's really saying is anyone can register a trademark for the Slants as long as they're not Asian.
Yeah. But you're also fighting back in your music, right? You have a recent EP out. It's called The Band Who Must Not Be Named.
Yeah.
And there's a song on there, right, that's called Fight Back?
There is a song called Fight Back, and it's about fighting against oppression. We also have another song called From the Heart, which is kind of like our open letter to the trademark office.
Yeah, and you have a music video for that as well, right?
Yeah, it was filmed in Joe's friend's studio.
Yeah, it's a temporary video. We're gonna do a full production for that one too.
Awesome.
Yeah, we want to have that be our final word on this court case. We want to move on as soon as the decision's coming through here. We want to move on from it, but we want to have one final word.
Yeah, when do you expect the decision? It's a high-profile case. Those usually come late June.
Yeah, was pretty much expecting late June.
Yeah. What do you plan to do to celebrate if you win the case? Release the video, I'm assuming?
Film the video. Film the video. We haven't filmed it yet. I mean, we'll probably celebrate in our favorite way, which is playing music, playing rock and roll.
Yeah. And what about if you unfortunately lose?
If we lose, we're not quite sure yet. I mean, I think we'll just continue to find other ways to fight against the system and to find ways to protect our name and kind of go from there. It really depends on how they rule. I think at this point, it's looking pretty good. And there's a possibility that the court rules narrowly, so on statutory grounds. In other words, Trademark Office was way wrong on this. The band should have had it, but the law itself is still good and remains intact. Obviously, that's not what we're looking for either, because just because it's our band's involved, it's actually much bigger than our band. It affects a lot of other cases. For example, the San Francisco group I mentioned, Dykes on Bikes, they've been in litigation for 16 years. This amazing Seattle feminist rock and roll band called Thunder Pussy, they were rejected for their trademark. An example that I always think about is this man who opened a restaurant, a Japanese restaurant using a Japanese word. The name of the restaurant being Fuku, F-U-K-U. But the Trademark Office rejected it, not because Fuku is an obscenity, it's just a Japanese word for joy or luck. They rejected it because it looked too much like an obscenity.
Wow.
Even though it's a beautiful Japanese word, very loaded with meaning for the Japanese community. And ironically, they had no problems whatsoever with French Connection UK, which is FCUK, also looks like an obscenity. So over and over again, we see how it's just inappropriately and inconsistently used, and we shouldn't stand for that in terms of like government regulations.
And you're not. What is, by way of closing here, what is one thing from each of you that happened in this journey that you didn't expect to happen? Or the one thing that you've learned from it?
I've learned that we have support from pretty much everybody on both sides, and that surprised me a lot.
Except the government, apparently.
Well, the funny thing is that we were actually on a compilation album with the Obamas and the Asian American Pacific Islanders department there in the White House, and they called us champions for the Asian American community. So one side of the government says, hey, you guys are champions, you guys are doing things right, while the other side is saying, you guys are racist against Asians. And so that's just really confusing, but to have support from bipartisan both sides really surprised me.
Yeah. Anything else?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg is even smaller in person, but she can command the stage. Her voice can pretty much shut everybody else up in the room, and you will listen to her.
She's smart.
She is smart. Brilliant.
I personally have a crush on her.
I actually have a crush on Sotomayor. I'm on Sotomayor, so even if she's not going to support us, but I support her.
Yeah, I mean, I think just throughout this journey, we realize how change takes a long, long time. I think a lot about one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr., which says that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And every time I think about that quote and I think about our particular journey, I realize that the moral arc does not bend on its own. It requires people who are dedicated to the cause of freedom, of liberty, of fighting for marginalized communities, and that we were placed in this opportunity to tackle this law on, be it as obscure and old of a law it may be, it's still a form of injustice in our government, and it's one that we believe should be removed. So we're stepping up to the plate, and we're going to fight it until the bitter end.
Yeah, well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. You promised us a song or two, so
Yeah.
I think.
Reaching out, reaching through, ghostly hands in abandoned rooms. Where's the charge? This hollow march, fading out in fits and starts. Don't let the words dissuade, don't let the text prevail, don't let the weakness of others infect your health. Don't be their alibi, don't be their greedy mouth. It's time, then it's now. Stand up tall and fight back rather than just sit back. Claw your way to the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. Tooth and nail will not retract. Lead the pack 'cause it's your time now, your time now. Look within a broken piece. You create what you want to see. Shut mind, shut eyes. Can't see, can't feel inside. Don't let the words dissuade. Don't let the text prevail. Don't let the weakness of others infect your health. Don't be their alibi. Don't be their greedy mouth. If it's time, then it's now. Stand up tall and fight back rather than just sit back. Claw your way to the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. Tooth and nail will not retract. Beat the pack 'cause it's your time now, your time now. Fight back rather than just sit back. Claw your way to the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. Tooth and nail will not retract. Beat the pack 'cause it's your time now, your time now. Fight back rather than just sit back. Claw your way to the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. Tooth and nail will not retract. Lead the pack 'cause it's your time now, your time now. Fight back rather than just sit back. Claw your way to the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Whoa, just react, heart and mind remain intact. Tooth and nail will not retract. Lead the pack 'cause it's your time now, your time now. So this next song, From the Heart, is one that we wrote originally as an open letter to the Trademark office. But really it's for anybody that's felt misunderstood or frustrated by haters out there. So if you felt unheard, invisible, or unnoticed, I want to invite you to be a part of this. So when I point at you, you say no. Ready? No. Again? No. So when you see something wrong, are you just going to remain silent? No. You see someone getting put down, you're getting put down, what do you say? No. Are you guys going to leave here without looking us up on Facebook? All right, let's do this, boys. 2, 3, 4. Sorry if my notes too sharp. Sorry if our voice is too raw. To make the piano weapon censor our intelligence until I talk to nothing at all. Sorry if you take offense. Made of rules and play pretend. No backwards feelings, backyard dealings. We're never gonna settle, never gonna settle. No, we won't remain silent. No, it's our defining moment. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. No, we won't be complacent. No, it's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. Yeah. Sorry if we tried too hard to take some power back for ours. The language of oppression, the blues to education until the West can end. Sorry if you take offense. Silence will not make amends. The system